It'll be Chig Okonkwo against Gunnar Helm for the Tennessee Titans starting tight end role, and it's no secret, I think the rookie will win it. We'll break down tight ends and running backs on today's edition of Locked On Titans.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we are going to continue our 2025 Locked On Titans training camp preview. We talked quarterback and special teams on yesterday's first installment. Today, we're going to dive into the weapons on offense and talk about the tight ends and the running backs. Of course, I'm going to go through who I think is a lock to make the roster at every position, go through who I think is on the bubble at every position, and then tell you who I think is a long shot to make the roster at every single position. Excited to see you guys play along with me. Throw your comments down below if you're watching on YouTube. Hit me up on social media if you're listening to the podcast. But before we dive in, do want to thank you for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. Speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. Couldn't do it without you guys. If you aren't an everydayer, now is the perfect time to be one. We're doing a training camp preview. Get to know every single player on the roster leading into training camp. And then once training camp gets here, it's football time, folks, and you're not going to be more entertained and more informed than you would be if you listen to Locked On Titans every day. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. But with that being said, again, we got to talk about the tight end position, and for me, there are two locks, and that's it. Only two locks at the tight end position, and it's Chig Okonkwo and Gunnar Helm. And not only are they locks to make the roster, they are locks to be battling for the most snaps at the tight end position. Now, looking at the tail of the tape, per se, between these two players, totally different style of players. And that is why I have continued to say throughout the offseason, since the draft happened, that I think that Gunnar Helm, the rookie out of Texas, will be the Tennessee Titans starting tight end, will be tight end one. And when I mean tight end one, what I'm really trying to say is I think Gunnar Helm will have the most snaps of any tight end on the Titans next year. I think he's the most versatile tight end. He is, to me, excuse me, kind of an in-between Chig Okonkwo and Gunnar Helm, or Josh Whyle. He's kind of the in-between of that Gunnar Helm is, because he has a little bit more receiving ability to get open, make somebody miss, make a catch over top of somebody in a contested situation, which we thought that Josh Whyle would be good at, but it's never really materialized. Gunnar Helm can do those things. I have way less questions about Gunnar Helm when I just watched him do it for Texas all the way to a playoff run, rather than Josh Whyle as kind of a role tight end in Cincinnati. No, Gunnar Helm was the starting tight end in Texas, a dominant player in college last year, who is just a much more reliable player to come out and produce right away. And honestly, I think the Titans can count on him to come out and produce right away. And then obviously, Gunnar Helm isn't the receiver that Chig Okonkwo is. He doesn't have the explosiveness. He doesn't have the speed. Chig Okonkwo ran the fastest 40-yard dash of any tight end in his draft class when he came out. I think it was a 4.39. Chig Okonkwo is one of the most athletic tight ends in the entire NFL. And I have no doubt that Chig Okonkwo can have a breakout season for what I think his ceiling is. I think Chig Okonkwo can come out and have 50 catches, 700 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think Chig Okonkwo can have that good of a year. But Gunnar Helm still get the most snaps. I could see Chig Okonkwo having better stats than Gunnar Helm because he's just a more explosive player. But Gunnar Helm be the guy who has the most opportunities because he is just, again, kind of an in-between of Josh Whyle and Chig Okonkwo, where he has a little bit more receiving ability than a guy like Josh Whyle. But the real issue with Chig Okonkwo that we talk about, and what really makes me feel this way, is that Chig Okonkwo is not a good enough blocker. He never has been. He's never going to be. In my opinion, Chig Okonkwo looks a little skinnier this year than he did last year, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think one of the big issues that I see in the world is that we try too hard to make something that sounds good true when the reality doesn't sound as bad as we think. And I think admitting to ourselves, Chig Okonkwo is not a blocking tight end. Chig Okonkwo is not going to be a starting tight end who's your number one tight end all the time, all year, like that type of guy. Once we can learn to admit that, then we can let Chig Okonkwo be who he's truly meant to be. And finally this year, we might be able to accept that and do that because we have a guy like Gunnar Helm who we're excited about and we believe in. It's a lot harder to be like, hey, Chig Okonkwo is not a starting tight end, but he can be a great offensive weapon role player within an offense. It's a lot harder to accept that when you're looking at Josh Whyle and Nick Vanette or Jeff Schwame. You know what I mean? Like, think about those type of tight ends. And why? No, Chig Okonkwo is going to be the starting tight end. Chig Okonkwo is the number one tight end. Chig Okonkwo could take a jump here. You know, it's obvious that it's hard to let that go when you don't have anything else to look forward to. But now that we can see that Gunnar Helm has more of a versatile wide tight end skill set, hand in the dirt next to the offensive tackle, executing isolation blocks, executing double teams to drive people off the line of scrimmage, pulling from the backside of the formation as a puller where Chig Okonkwo, it's an adventure. Now that we have somebody in Gunnar Helm who we can be like, all right, that guy can do that stuff. Now we can accept who Chig Okonkwo truly is and let him truly play in that role all year long. Let Chig Okonkwo be a big slot receiver. Let him be a guy that you bring in motion from the backside of the formation. Let him be a guy who's off the line of scrimmage as a wing off of Gunnar Helm in a two tight end set. Let's let Chig Okonkwo do that stuff so he gets a free release off the line of scrimmage. He's not tasked with one-on-one isolation blocks against defensive ends. Let's not have Chig Okonkwo do that. Let's accept who he is and not put him in, this box that we want him to be in when he's in a box that's different. And now that Gunnar Helm is there to assume that role that we're all looking for, now we can let Chig Okonkwo do that. And I think, honestly, while you may hear this and say, no, Chig Okonkwo's tight end one, I can't believe this, or you may hear this and be like, man, Chig Okonkwo's so overrated, he drops the football, I can't wait till he leaves after the year. But no matter who you are, I think we can all look at this and say, the fact that Chig Okonkwo and Gunnar Helm both can vie for the tight end one role, but can do it in totally different ways and skill sets, that's good for the Titans. That's great for the Tennessee Titans offense because they have a tight end that they can use in any situation. You got smaller linebackers, we're going to jump over you with Gunnar Helm. You got slower safeties, we're going to have you in a one-on-one matchup with Chig Okonkwo, and he's going to dust you. So this is ultimately good for the Titans, but the reality is there are only two locks at the tight end position. It's Chig and it's Helm. And those two guys are not only locks to make the roster, they're locked in a battle for the most tight end snaps. Again, I think it'll be Gunnar Helm, but I think we could even see Chig Okonkwo have a better statistical season than Gunnar Helm while not getting as many snaps because Chig can be used more efficiently and more effectively in a better role, even if that means less snaps than Gunnar Helm. So with that being said, I know that I said that Will Levis was on the bubble because I think he could be traded. But I think a Will Levis trade is way more likely than a Chig Okonkwo trade. I talked about it last week when we talked about some trade options when the Dolphins, were looking for a tight end. They got Darren Waller eventually, but everybody was like, oh, should we trade Chig Okonkwo there? And I would be open to it if it was a good draft pick. But like I said then, the Titans aren't going to get a draft pick that is good enough to outweigh what Chig Okonkwo can do for Cam Ward in this offense this year because the Titans need to get better and win some games, and they need Cam Ward to play well. So unless the Titans are getting, what could be a high fourth or, a third-round pick, then there just is an incentive to trade Chig Okonkwo. So I didn't put him on the bubble because I think it's less likely. But I did, in fact, put Josh Whyle on the bubble, even if I don't think anyone would trade for him. I just think he's on the bubble to make the team in general. Today's episode is brought to you by Fan FanDuel Sportsbook. Look, summer sports are in full swing now, folks. Whether you're all about baseball, under the lights, golf on the greens, high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. Look, you're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach. I love FanDuel. It's a great way to track your favorite matchups. They have new daily promotions that keep the app really, really fresh, easy to use, fast to pay out. You're already watching these regular season games. Now you can make them feel like must-watch events. Open the FanDuel app today, right now, and if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Again, open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, breaking down the tight end position and the running back position, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the show. But of course, it's our training camp preview. I do the locks, the bubbles, and the long shots. We talked about the locks for the tight end position. Chig Okonkwo, Gunnar Helm fighting for tight end 1. Now we got to talk about the bubble guys on the roster at tight end. And we start with Josh Whyle, who I think his time could almost be out. Now, before we get into it, thanks again for making Locked On Titans your first listen. Remember, training camp preview. Tomorrow, we're going to talk offensive line. We're going to start next week with wide receiver, edge, linebacker, defensive line, secondary as well. And then training camp will be here, and we'll get ready for that, talking about camp battles and players to watch. And I cannot wait. Football's right around the corner. But thanks for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Josh Whyle has just not lived up to what his expectations were. And I think that Gunnar Helm's skill set is similar enough that it could really push a guy like Josh Whyle off the roster. I mean, through his career, he's caught 37 passes, 342 yards, and 2 touchdowns in 2 seasons. Played in 11 games his first year, did play all 17 last year, was definitely more effective. I mean, the majority of that came last year, 28 catches, 248 yards, and a touchdown. Like, he did some things, but Josh Whyle stepping up to be, again, I think Gunnar Helm is the only person challenging Chig Okonkwo for tight end 1 snaps, for the number 1 tight end role. And I think a guy like Josh Whyle was originally expected to come in and do that. He was going to be the Y tight end that could pair with Chig Okonkwo, so Chig Okonkwo could be more of a move tight end. That was going to be Josh Whyle's role. And quite honestly, it just hasn't happened. He just didn't show it last year. His blocking certainly leaves some to be desired. For a guy who's 6'7", 250 pounds, he just has not been a good enough blocker. And look, you go back in college, he was a guy who got a lot of isolation opportunities because he's so tall, he's so long. And that's great, but in the NFL, you're not going to dominate on those opportunities like you did in college. You're not going to have the same success rate that you did. And if you're not winning in those situations at a high enough rate, and you simply haven't turned into a good enough blocker, it makes it tough. It makes it tough. And then you get Gunnar Helm in here with a similar skill set. It's like, are we doubling down on this? Do we need both of these guys? I think Josh Whyle ultimately does make the roster, but I think it's going to be closer than people think, because I think David Martin Robinson. All right, now DMR is a guy who I know maybe some fans may not recognize right away. Didn't see much of him last year. He played in 5 games. He caught 1 pass for 6 yards. All right, he barely played. Only saw him in 5 games again. Not a guy who was out there playing a ton. All right, I think snaps, he got like 50 snaps on special teams and I don't know, like 40 on offense, something like that. So 90 snaps on the season, maybe 100 total. Not a guy who made a big impact. But if you remember, the Tennessee Titans kept 5 tight ends on the roster last year, the initial 53-man roster. They kept Vanette and Chig and Whyle, and then David Martin Robinson and Thomas Odukoya. And we were all freaking out, I remember it, at the beginning of the season because for the first month of the year, those guys weren't even active. I mean, I just told you how much David Martin Robinson played. Thomas Odukoya didn't play much more. So it's like, why did you sacrifice 2 roster spots on 2 tight ends so that you have 5 tight ends on the roster? And you're not even going to use those guys. Well, the answer that was provided by Ran Carthon, and I think Brian Callahan corroborated, is that they thought that if they waived those players, they would be picked up. And they wanted to continue to develop those players because they were very high on their potential. Okay, that's fine. Well, if that is the case, and you could say, well, Ran Carthon's gone because he made stupid decisions like that, and that was a dumb thing to think. But Brian Callahan was certainly in on that. So if that was the case, if we are to take that as a good explanation, then David Martin Robinson and Thomas Odukoya, one of those guys better be ready to contribute this year, right? You basically sacrifice those roster spots as developmental spots because you believed in these guys. Well, it's time to show it. And I think David Martin Robinson is showing it. If I'm remembering correctly, I think Jim Wyatt said recently he had 10 catches during mandatory minicamp. David Martin Robinson is more of a Chig Okonkwo style guy, but he's a bit bulkier than Chig Okonkwo. He's 6'3", 247 pounds. I know that Chig weighed in not too far off that. Like, it was like too high, 230s or something like that. But we see Chig Okonkwo. I think he plays closer to like 225, 230, if I'm honest. So David Martin Robinson, a little bit bigger than Chig Okonkwo, but an athletic guy. A guy who can do similar things within the offense as a move tight end, the things that I described earlier. Get him on the move, get him off the line of scrimmage, but he's a little bit bigger, so he might be a little bit more versatile than Chig Okonkwo. Wouldn't you rather have a guy like that than Josh Whyle? Honestly, if you have a guy like Gunnar Helm, who could be your matchup guy, your red zone weapon, your classic tight end one, would you rather have Thomas Odukoya over Josh Whyle? Who, Thomas Odukoya is a much better blocker than Josh Whyle. He's just a bigger dude, stronger dude, thicker build, 6'6", 250. He's just built more solid. Remember, Thomas Odukoya is the international pathway player that the Titans have had on their roster and in their organization for a while. But it begs the question, and that's why I didn't put Josh Whyle in the locks to make him. I have him here in the bubble group with David Martin Robinson and Odukoya. I could see all 3 of those guys with a path to make the roster. I could see none of those guys with a path to make the roster. Like, if you told me any of those 3 guys didn't make it, I wouldn't be shocked. If you told me any of those 3 guys did make it, I wouldn't be shocked. That is what you call the bubble. Now, I think Whyle and DMR ultimately make it, but we have training camp ahead, and my 53-man roster prediction will certainly change from the one I did a month ago to the one I do a month from now when we've seen some real football. Now, I do want to mention, because I get you acquainted with every single player on the roster in this training camp preview, Drake Dabney, 6'5", 246 pounds out of TCU, undrafted free agent tight end, been around, but he's a guy who is a long shot to make this roster. Camp body, if I'm quite honest with you. With the talent the Titans have here to choose from at tight end and guys they've invested in, there's just no way that Drake Dabney is making this roster. But with that being said, let's talk about this running back position because, man, Tony Pollard just continues to be underrated. Titans fans, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We have talked about the tight end position We did our locks in Chig and Helm. We did our bubble with Whyle DMR and Odukoya. And we did our long shot with poor Drake Dabney. Doesn't really have a good chance to make this roster. But hopefully he can impress in the preseason and get another opportunity elsewhere, be on a practice squad, something like that. But with that being said, we got to move to running back. Tony Pollard continues to be incredibly underrated, but the Titans running back position at the end is going to be pretty interesting. And I'm not convinced that the people who make the final roster are actually on the team right now. Now, before we dive into that, I do want to thank you again for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed to your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at the offensive line. Starting next week, we're going to be looking at the wide receiver group, which is going to be very, very interesting. But with that being said, the locks to make the roster are Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. I know you may be thinking, what about the rookie the Titans just drafted, Kyle Mullings, out of Michigan? How is he not? That's a 7th-round pick. Go look how many 7th-round picks make the roster. It's not as many as you would think. Now, I know you could say, oh, it's a draft pick, but the Titans had 9 draft picks. Think if it came down to Mullings or Xavier Restrepo. Who do you want? You know? Think about those kind of decisions. I mean, Mullings, we'll talk about him in a second. But I think outside of that, Spears and Pollard are easily the locks. They're both going to make this team. They're going to have massive roles on the offense. No doubt about it. Now, you want to talk about next year with these guys? I think the Titans might have 2 brand new running backs as their tandem by this time next year. I don't think that would be that crazy. With Tony Pollard's price next year and see how he wears down this year with the wear and tear that he's taken. Can Tajay Spears stay healthy? If not, maybe it's time to move on. Those are conversations for after the season based on how the season plays out, but you better keep them in the back of your mind. Regardless of that, this year, money in the bank, Pollard and Spears locked in. We know what the running back rotation is going to be like. Anything else is just luxury filler type stuff. Now we get to the bubble at running back. Well, let me say this. I did want to throw this in. I don't really care too much about, the rankings. It's ranking season. Okay. It's easy to talk about if you don't have much to talk about. Let's be honest. Okay. So I'm not going to ignore it completely, but I also don't want to spend too much time here. Just want to say Tony Pollard not even getting a vote, not even getting an honorable mention for top 10 running back in the NFL. I think it's lame. I think after the season he had last year, 12th in the NFL in rushing yards in only 16 games, with a tough offensive situation, I think Tony Pollard deserves a little bit more love. He's underrated nationally for sure, but I don't feel so passionately about Tony Pollard being a top 10 running back that I'm going to get mad about it. Whatever. I wish he would have got a little bit more respect with a mention in there. And some of the other people that got mentioned in there, I'm like, can't get Tony Pollard a mention in here? But at the end of the day, it's someone else's rankings, whatever. Doesn't really matter. But Spears and Pollard locks. The bubble is Mullings and Chestnut. And again, Kyle Mullings is a 7th-round pick coming off a core muscle injury. He got back into practice, a mandatory minicamp there at the end, and that bodes well for him going into training camp, but it'll be all about special teams for Mullings. He's been a guy who's done returning in the past. He was a converted linebacker at Michigan. The history of violence as a linebacker with the size and the speed, 6'2", 220, that looks like a ready-made special teams demon. That's why Hassan Haskins was so good. Another Michigan running back who was a big physical guy who was more of a special teams player, I think, than a real running back. Special teams will be the key for Kyle Mullings. He has to find a way to make it, and with his build and his skill set, he should be able to do so. But the point is, if he comes out and he's not very good on special teams in camp in the preseason and they don't feel comfortable with him there, which I don't think will be the case, but if that happens, then he's not going to make the team. They're not going to keep Mullings because they want his running back skills. He's a power back who can be a switch up and a goal line and a short yardage, but they could find a different veteran to do that. they could find somebody who's better at special teams to fill that role too. It's not so important that he's just a lock to make it. He's got to be good on special teams. It's not about playing running back when you're a 7th-round pick. It's about special teams. And that's why Julius Chestnut is on the bubble too. Look, most people, my everydayers out there know I am not a big fan of Julius Chestnut. Does not have the requisite wiggle or physical running style. For me, I don't see it. I don't understand it. He's not great in pass protection. He's terrible on special teams. I don't understand. But clearly they like him in Tennessee. And if Mullings isn't better than Chestnut on special teams, Chestnut's probably a better runner of the football, though. So that's why I would say both those guys are on the bubble. Because if Mullings can come in and be great on special teams, he's a good enough runner where they don't need Julius Chestnut. But if Mullings comes out and he's terrible on special teams, I might as well go with the guy who runs the ball a little bit better because I'm going to need to spell my top 2 backs this year so they don't break down. Now, the long shot to make it, and it does make me frustrated to say this because I, again, not a big fan of Julius Chestnut, really would like him off the roster. But Tyrion Davis-Price, the Titans brought in after they got rid of, now I forget what the kid's name was, but they had an undrafted free agent in. They got rid of him. They brought in Tyrion Davis-Price, which to me, to go out and bring in a veteran player like Davis-Price, who has been a roster bubble, journeyman type guy, to bring in a guy like that, it's like, we don't want any more young running backs. We want guys who know what they're doing, who are tough, physical, and who can come in and play special teams. And that's why I say Tyrion Davis-Price is a long shot because he hasn't been with the organization for the time that Julius Chestnut is. But there is absolutely a world where TDP takes Julius Chestnut's roster spot and it's Pollard, Spears, Mullings, and TDP. I absolutely think that could happen. I don't think it will happen, but it's a possibility. And again, it's all about special teams because Pollard and Spears have a pretty good handle on most of the running back duties. And after that, it's all about special teams first, and then we look at your running skill set after that. So bubble, Mullings and Chestnut, long shot, Tyrion Davis-Price, locks, Pollard and Spears. We've done quarterbacks, we've done special team, we've done tight ends, we've done running backs. Again, tomorrow we're going to do offensive line, and we're going to hit wide receiver to start next week. Training camp right around the corner, folks. As I always tell you, that is going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.